The relationship between the US, Canada, and Mexico just took a dramatic turn, and it all started with a big decision from Washington. On March 4th, 2025, President Donald Trump dropped a bombshell. He slapped a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico, blaming both countries for not doing enough to stop fentanyl from pouring into the US. But that wasn't all. Canada's energy sector got hit hard too, with a separate 10% tariff on oil and natural gas. Canada wasn't about to take this lying down. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wasted no time firing back, announcing 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods right away. And that was just the beginning. Canada is gearing up to expand these tariffs to another $125 billion worth of US products in the coming weeks. Trudeau called Trump's tariffs completely unfair and made it clear. Canada isn't backing down until the US reverses course. In fact, they've already taken the fight to the World Trade Organization, WTO, officially challenging the US over what they see as unjustified trade restrictions. Mexico, on the other hand, caught a bit of a break. After a conversation between Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, the US agreed to hit pause on the 25% tariffs for most Mexican imports, at least until April 2nd. The move was a nod to Mexico's efforts to tighten border security and crack down on drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl. President Sheinbaum welcomed the decision and reassured Washington that Mexico is committed to tackling these issues. But for Canada, no such luck. The tariffs remain firmly in place. With Washington refusing to budge, Canada is ready to escalate things even further. Ontario Premier Doug Ford made a shocking announcement. Starting March 10th, the province will slap a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the US. That's a big deal because states like Michigan, New York, and Minnesota rely on Ontario for power. Around 1.5 million American homes and businesses could see their energy costs skyrocket. And Ford wasn't shy about his intentions. If the US doesn't back down, he's willing to take things to the extreme, even threatening to cut off electricity exports completely. This is a major escalation in the trade standoff, and the impact could ripple across industries, from auto manufacturing to steel production to everyday consumer prices. Ontario Premier Doug Ford isn't backing down in the face of US tariffs. During a fiery press conference, he made one thing clear. If Washington thinks Canada will just sit back and take the hit, they've got another thing coming. If they want to cripple Ontario, I'll do whatever it takes to fight back, even if it means turning off their lights, Ford declared, referring to states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, which rely heavily on Canadian electricity. Canada is bracing for the impact of Trump's aggressive trade policies, but Ontario isn't stopping at electricity. Ford is exploring other ways to hit back, including slapping a surcharge on every megawatt of electricity exported to the US. That would mean higher energy costs for American homes and businesses. But it doesn't stop there. Ford also threatened to cancel a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink, which provides internet services to rural areas. And if that wasn't bold enough, he suggested yanking all American-made alcohol off the shelves of Ontario's liquor stores. Economists are already warning that Trump's tariffs could have serious consequences: job losses, rising costs, and economic uncertainty. Ontario, as Canada's manufacturing hub, is especially vulnerable. To soften the blow, the provincial government has set aside a massive $40 billion relief package, including $5 billion in emergency funding, tax breaks, payroll subsidies, and direct financial support for local governments. It's a sign that Ontario is gearing up for a long and messy trade battle. Despite these preparations, one thing remains unclear: what Trump will do next. Even Ford admitted, "We have no idea what's coming tomorrow." Honestly, I don't think even President Trump knows what's coming tomorrow. That uncertainty has businesses on both sides of the border on edge, waiting to see how this trade dispute will unfold. Meanwhile, the Canadian federal government isn't sitting still, promising to match any US trade actions dollar for dollar. Member of Parliament Charlie Angus is taking a different approach, urging Canadians to stop buying American products altogether. He believes that by shifting support to local businesses, Canada can reduce its dependence on the US and send a strong message in the process. But that's not the only thing he's pushing back on. In response to Trump's repeated comments about absorbing Canada as America's 51st state, Angus made his stance crystal clear. Canada is independent, and that's not changing anytime soon. In a bold statement during a recent interview, Canadian Member of Parliament Charlie Angus made it clear, Canada isn't up for sale. We are a proud, independent nation. The idea of surrendering our sovereignty is simply out of the question, he declared. But Angus isn't stopping at words. He's actively pushing back, even calling on the Canadian government to block President Donald Trump from attending the upcoming G7 summit in June. His reasoning? Trump's aggressive trade policies and dismissive rhetoric toward Canada. Not everyone agrees with this move. Some former diplomats warn that excluding the US leader could weaken the G7's ability to work together on critical global issues. But for Angus, the message is simple. Canada won't be bullied. For decades, the United States has thrived on a steady flow of imported resources, from energy and raw materials to food, technology, and skilled labor. These imports aren't just luxuries. They're essential to keeping industries running and maintaining the country's economic dominance. Yet, under Trump's America First agenda, global trade partnerships have been shaken. His administration has imposed tariffs on both rivals and longtime allies, including Canada, the European Union, and China, in an effort to boost US manufacturing. The problem? The modern economy isn't that simple. Decades of globalization have built intricate supply chains, where one country's raw materials fuel another's production. When those supply lines get disrupted, the effects ripple far beyond national borders. In response to Trump's tariffs, Canada is looking at stronger countermeasures, ones that go beyond just slapping retaliatory taxes on American goods. One of the most serious proposals on the table? Restricting the flow of oil and electricity to the US. That's a big deal. Canada plays a major role in powering American homes and industries. Cutting or limiting that supply could cause widespread disruptions, especially in sectors that depend on a reliable energy source. But energy isn't the only thing on the chopping block. Canadian officials are also discussing possible restrictions on rare earth minerals and natural gas, both of which are crucial to everything from high-tech manufacturing to defense systems. To understand just how much the US relies on Canada, consider this. In 2024 alone, America imported nearly $130 billion worth of energy from its northern neighbor. That included 1.46 billion barrels of crude oil, valued at $116.8 billion, 2,701 billion cubic feet of natural gas, worth $10.8 billion, 37 terawatt hours of electricity, 1.85 billion, 10 million pounds of uranium, 400 million. Crude oil made up the lion's share of these imports, highlighting Canada's crucial role in keeping America's energy supply stable. With tensions rising, Canada isn't waiting around to see what happens next. It's already working to diversify its energy exports, especially in Asian markets. Countries like China, Japan, and South Korea have become key buyers, offering Canada an alternative to the American market. A major turning point came in early 2024 with the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. This critical project now allows Canadian oil to be shipped directly from Alberta to the Pacific coast, making it easier to send fuel across the Pacific to Asia. By late 2024, the first shipments of Canadian crude oil made their way to new buyers in Asia, marking a major shift in Canada's energy trade. Refineries in Japan, South Korea, and Brunei received their first deliveries via the newly expanded Trans Mountain (TMX) pipeline, opening up fresh opportunities for Alberta's energy sector. One country in particular saw a massive spike in Canadian energy imports: China. In the first 11 months of 2024, Alberta's energy exports to China skyrocketed to $2 billion, a stunning five-fold increase from the previous year. The biggest factor? Crude oil sales, which went from virtually nothing in 2023 to $1.8 billion in 2024. Japan, another key market, is also becoming an important buyer. Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, emphasized the need to strengthen ties with Japan, especially with the U.S. threatening new tariffs on Canadian energy. Alberta is now actively looking for more stable trading partners for its oil and natural gas. Despite being one of the world's largest oil producers, the United States still relies heavily on imports to meet its energy needs. These include crude oil, natural gas, electricity, coal, and uranium, and Canada is by far the biggest supplier. In 2024 alone, the U.S. imported an average of 6.1 million barrels of crude oil per day, with a staggering 67% of that, over 4 million barrels per day, coming from Canada. These imports travel through major pipelines like Keystone XL and Enbridge Mainline, feeding refineries across multiple states. Illinois, refineries in Chicago and Joliet process large amounts of Canadian crude. Texas, heavy crude arrives via the Keystone pipeline system for refining in Gulf Coast facilities. Minnesota, the Enbridge Mainline delivers oil to refineries in St. Paul, Michigan, and Ohio. The same pipeline network supplies refineries in Detroit and Toledo. These states depend on Canadian crude to produce gasoline, diesel, and other essential fuels that power cars, trucks, and industries across the Midwest and beyond. Oil isn't the only crucial Canadian export. The United States also leans heavily on Canada for natural gas. In 2024, the U.S. imported 8.5 billion cubic feet per day BCFD of natural gas, with a whopping 7.4 BCFD coming from Canada. These imports are critical for heating, power generation, and industrial use, particularly in cold weather states: New York and New England, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. Canadian gas keeps homes warm in the winter. Illinois and Michigan, key supplies ensure heating and industrial operations run smoothly. Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, these states rely on Canadian gas to power their factories and electric grids. Without a steady supply from Canada, many of these regions would face energy shortages, price spikes, and potential blackouts, especially in harsh winter months. But Canada's energy influence doesn't stop at oil and gas. Electricity imports from Canada have become a key part of U.S. energy stability. Many American states, particularly in the Northeast and Midwest, depend on Canadian hydroelectric power to keep the lights on and businesses running. In 2024, the U.S. pulled in nearly 39 terawatt-hours of electricity from outside its borders, and a staggering 95% of it came from Canada. Why? Because Canada's massive hydroelectric resources make it a reliable, cost-effective, and clean energy supplier for several U.S. states. New York gets a steady flow of hydroelectric power from Quebec, helping it cut down on fossil fuel use. Vermont and New England rely on electricity from Hydro-Quebec, ensuring grid stability while boosting renewable energy efforts. Michigan taps into Ontario's power supply to handle surges in demand. Minnesota and North Dakota also depend on Canadian hydroelectricity to keep their grids running smoothly. This cross-border electricity trade isn't just convenient, it's essential. It helps prevent power shortages and stabilizes energy prices in many U.S. states. Coal isn't what it used to be in the U.S., with cleaner energy sources taking over. But despite the decline, Canada remains a modest supplier. In 2024, the U.S. imported 4 million short tons of coal, mainly from Canada, Colombia, and Indonesia. While it's not a game changer, certain industries still rely on it. Michigan uses Canadian coal for power generation and industrial needs. Minnesota takes a portion for steel production. Some shipments still make their way to New England, though demand is shrinking. Nuclear energy is another area where Canada plays a key role in keeping the U.S. running. In 2024, the U.S. imported 50 million pounds of uranium, and Canada supplied 20% of it. This uranium is essential for fueling nuclear reactors across the country. Illinois, home to the most nuclear power plants in the U.S., relies heavily on Canadian uranium. South Carolina and North Carolina depend on it to keep their reactors online. Pennsylvania, another nuclear powerhouse, also benefits from a steady supply. Without these imports, America's nuclear industry would face serious challenges. Despite the US's heavy reliance on Canadian energy and resources, the Trump administration decided to hit Canadian imports with tariffs, citing concerns over drug trafficking and illegal immigration. But here's the thing, the numbers don't back that up. Government data shows that Canada is responsible for just 0.2% of fentanyl entering the US. The real sources? China and Mexico. So if stopping fentanyl was the real goal, why the sudden crackdown on Canadian goods? That's where things get interesting. Some experts believe these tariffs are less about security and more about control. Specifically, control over Canada's huge reserves of oil, gas, and minerals. The US economy depends on these resources, and having direct access would be a major advantage. And then there's the Arctic. With melting ice caps opening up new shipping routes and untapped resources, Canada's northern territory has become a geopolitical goldmine. Could these trade tensions be part of a bigger plan to position the US for future expansion? President Trump has repeatedly floated the idea of making Canada the 51st state. While it may sound extreme, some believe the idea serves multiple purposes. Military strategy. Absorbing Canada would eliminate the northern border, making defense logistics simpler. Political distraction. A tough stance on Canada could rally nationalist voters and divert attention from domestic issues. Trade negotiation tactics. Some experts think this is just a high-stakes bluff, a way to pressure Canada into making trade concessions. Either way, the situation is raising serious questions about the future of US-Canada relations. What do you think? Is this just a tough trade negotiation, or is something bigger at play? Drop your thoughts in the comments.